As we begin our next module on incorporating data into your proposals, we're going to be discussing public data and how you can use that to strengthen your proposals. We've talked in prior breakouts about leveraging the personal effect, the human stories about what your agency and what your program impacts. But we'll be talking a little bit more about some of those public data sets, data sources that you can use to kind of add that macro element to your proposals. And talking through some of the sources that we've talked about in this presentation, like census data, ACS data, the food systems dashboard. That was another Rutgers University project. But going back a beat, what public data sources do you use in your applications, Asia, and what would you recommend to the folks watching this presentation?
Absolutely. So I love ACS data, American Community Survey data is really great. Also, geographical mapping data, so data that comes from NJDEP, Department of Environmental Protection. That data is really good just in terms of the GIS approach of it. It allows me to be able to track health outcomes in particular, because public health is something that ties back into all the work that we do. And so I think funders really appreciate that. So that's some of the best practice that I'll give clients to how does your program or how does your product or what have you that you're developing, how does that tie back into health? Because health isn't just physical health, it's also mental, emotional, behavioral. And so, those are a couple that I dabble in.
Absolutely. I think a lot of that public data, the strength of ACS data, census data, is that this is a universal put out by the government, a trusted source. And I do like to try to supplement that. We mentioned ALICE in this presentation, which looks beyond some of those federal poverty guidelines and limits, which haven't really changed much in decades, and starting to look at the current here and now, especially taking into fact cost of living, inflation, especially in an expensive state like New Jersey. It takes a look at how much does it actually cost to get by in these communities, and how many folks are in that working poor where maybe one or both of the heads of household are working but still having trouble making ends meet. And for example, here in New Brunswick, historically the poverty rate has hovered around high 20s, low 30s percentage, but that ALICE data point is usually in the 60s, which means that double the amount of folks who qualify as being in those federal poverty guidelines actually struggle to live in the city when you factor in housing, transportation, education, food, utilities, everything. And I think that usually goes a long way for funders to say that, look, even if you're looking at the top-down view, you might see these poverty guidelines, but people, especially in the record inflation we've had in the last several years, are struggling, and it's becoming more expensive, more difficult to make ends meet. Just strengthening that appeal and showing why their investment is important for your community.
Absolutely. And I think building upon larger from just the databases or the data pools that currently exist, I think it's also important for nonprofits to do their due diligence to look for some of the studies that are out there as well from statisticians or researchers that have done some of the heavy lifting for you already, but it also allows for the comparative analysis component. If you're not able to find case studies or have access to some of those studies, because some of them are part of paid subscriptions as well, but in any event that you don't have access, it does allow you the opportunity to compare specifically from the point of what's working for them, but also what type of person in your population that you're looking to serve. Maybe you can pull some of those insights from case studies that they put together to see if there's any room for you to enhance your current program, or if there's any room for you to put within your grant proposal to fill a gap or expand reach.
And on that comparative component, there are some of these specialized data sources, like the Food Systems Data Dashboard. The USDA and EPA have put out tools in the past for looking at the different health qualities of communities when it comes down to food security, air quality, water quality. And some of those clearinghouses have a lot of those data points at once, and they'll show their math where they got that data, and it could be a great way for you to get this holistic snapshot of what a community faces. And speaking from the Food Systems Data Dashboard, that was put together by the Food Democracy Collaborative and Rutgers. They did a lot of surveying with community organizations in New Jersey, looking at what's important. ALICE data you'll see is on that website, thinking about SNAP distribution, SNAP redemption rates, thinking about urban agriculture land use, and a lot of things that are really thematically on point for food systems organizations and organizations that address food insecurity. And we'll have this linked in the Canvas site for this module, but a tremendous resource for you to leverage in your grant applications future forward. But I think the main thing is just really showing your math. Like, you want to think about when you were back in school and you had to give like your works cited. You want to make sure that you're able to refer to these sites and making sure that it's a legit site, not just someone's blog that you agree with, but rather something that is verifiable. They show their methods, and you have a great degree of confidence that it's factual.
Absolutely, and peer reviewed, right? Because a lot of this work that we do as it relates to food insecurity could be seen as subjective because no one's lived experience is the same as another. And so continue to take this moment during this reflection period to truly understand which public data sources have you used before, or how you can make sure that you have a verifying process within engaging with that data as well for your funding proposals. And also, what are you using most and why? Because when we talked earlier in the course about to keep a balance between where you're putting your work efforts or your funding, it's important to make sure that it's still aligned all across the board. So you may want to explore why you're using something more than another. That could just spark those conversations within. And then lastly, make sure that you visit our Canvas page to go ahead and engage with the New Jersey Food Data Systems dashboard that is going to be super beneficial to your work as it relates to grant writing, grant proposals, but also making an impact in the communities that you serve.